Undercover boss spotted a woman baking morning buns at 5 a.m. What he discovered stunned the company. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The ones who did the work didn't get paid for it. The ones who baked from dawn, who mixed the dough and shaped the buns, were told the company covered costs. But the truth was different. At 5 a.m., in a quiet back kitchen, flour dust still hanging in the air, a young woman pressed a stack of receipts into her apron pocket. She whispered to a coworker, "We buy the flour ourselves. They report it as corporate expenses, but it never comes." She said it as if it were normal. No outrage, no disbelief, just survival. And in that moment, hidden by the shadows of a storage doorway, someone else was listening. Jackson Reeves, 52 years old, founder and CEO of Sunrise Bakery Group, was standing there disguised as a delivery helper. A cap pulled low, jeans dusty, sleeves rolled up. On paper, this branch was performing well, steady revenue, no complaints filed. But something had been gnawing at him for months. High turnover, missing supply reports, unexplained budget gaps. He hadn't come for breakfast. He had come for the truth. The smell of rising dough clung to the air, sweet but heavy. Metal trays rattled as she pulled another sheet of buns from the oven, the heat lighting her face with a soft amber glow. There was no triumph in her expression, only fatigue. She had been here since 4, and after finishing this shift, she would still be short on pay. Jackson watched closely. Every movement was efficient, practiced, yet worn thin by repetition. This wasn't pride. This was endurance. She paused only once, wiping flour across her cheek with the back of her hand. That's when Jackson noticed the paper she slid onto the counter. A small notebook, edges frayed, pages bent. Inside were handwritten numbers, dates, items purchased, totals spent from her own pocket, eggs, butter, sugar, flour. Each red circle marking the difference between what she spent and what the company claimed to cover. Her voice, quiet but steady, carried the weight of months. Over $1,200 gone. No one ever asked where it went. Jackson didn't step forward. Not yet. He leaned against the doorframe, eyes narrowed, his silence heavy. He remembered training his managers years ago. If you want to know whether a bakery is healthy, don't look at the sales reports. Look at the hands of the people shaping the dough before dawn. And what he saw now was not health, it was neglect hidden in plain sight. Outside, the street was still dark. The neon sign flickered faintly, open, 24 hours. But inside, the only light that mattered was the truth glowing from that battered notebook. Jackson's pulse steadied. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a system designed to look whole while quietly draining the people who kept it alive. Just a few quiet questions. An old notebook, and a silent investigation had begun. The drizzle outside had slowed, but the morning air still pressed cool against the glass. Jackson stayed by the doorframe longer than he needed to, watching her move trays in and out of the oven with a rhythm carved from habit. She wasn't sloppy. She wasn't distracted. Every gesture carried intention, like she had learned to stretch both time and supplies farther than they were ever meant to go. That was the first signal. On the HR dashboard, this branch had shown record efficiency. But here, the truth looked different. He finally stepped inside. The bell over the back door jingled faintly, but no one looked up. Not the young man sweeping in the corner, not the dishwasher pulling racks of mugs. They had all learned to work quietly, to move without attracting attention. Jackson adjusted his cap lower, kept his stride slow, the gait of a man who belonged but wasn't worth noticing. He slid onto a stool near the prep counter, close enough to watch, far enough to disappear. The woman placed another tray on the rack, brushed a streak of flour across her apron, then turned to pour a cup of coffee into a chipped ceramic mug. When she set it in front of him, she spoke softly. "It's early. You sure you want the strong batch?" Jackson nodded, voice even. "That's fine. Busy morning?" Her pause lasted less than a second, but it was enough. She smiled, but the smile stayed nowhere near her eyes. Busy doesn't mean much when the supplies run out before the shift ends. She said it like she was commenting on the weather, something inevitable, not worth fighting. Jackson's stomach tightened. He let the silence settle before he replied, casual. Company doesn't cover that? This time her laugh was shorter, sharper, without humor. On paper they do. Ask the reports. Everything looks fine. But ask my bank account? That's different. She slid the notebook closer, just enough for him to glimpse the red circles, the calculations written in hurried pencil strokes. I started writing it down. Otherwise, I'd start thinking maybe I imagined it. Jackson lifted the mug, let the bitter steam fill the space between them. He didn't read every line, not yet. He didn't need to. The story was already written in her voice. The resignation that comes from repeating truth too many times, to ears that never listen. He remembered the turnover numbers, 38% in 1 year. Good employees leaving, not because of pay alone, but because invisible weight had been added to their backs until they broke. He set the mug down slowly, eyes on the counter, and asked in a tone so low it nearly vanished under the hum of the ovens. Who decides what gets reported? She glanced toward the office door at the far end of the hall. Manager. Always the manager. She didn't need to say more. Jackson knew the name already from files he'd reviewed the week before. Brad Coleman. On paper, Brad was competent, clean, even praised for efficiency. But here, the air shifted when his name was spoken, like people were careful not to breathe too loud near it. Jackson leaned back, letting her step away when another tray demanded her attention. He studied the notebook again, then angled it toward the faint light for a single discrete photo on his phone. The screen captured not just numbers, but the quiet theft of dignity. Across the prep room, the clock ticked toward 6. A delivery truck rumbled outside, shaking the thin window panes. Life moved on as if nothing unusual was happening. Yet inside, Jackson felt the lines connecting, the pattern emerging, supplies missing, budgets falsified, employees carrying the burden in silence. This wasn't a glitch, it was structure. He rose from the stool, stretching his back like any worker shaking off stiffness. No one stopped him. No one even looked up. That was the real problem. Wrong had lived here so long it had blended into the routine. Jackson stepped into the cool air again, pulling his jacket tighter. His phone buzzed once, a reminder of a standing board call later in the day. He ignored it. Instead, he dialed a different number, voice low when it connected. Mara, he said. We may have a problem. Quiet audit. 6 months of invoices. Don't alert the branch. Just bring me the truth. She didn't ask questions. She never did. Just a single reply. Understood. Jackson ended the call, eyes narrowing on the glow of the bakery's neon sign. From the street it looked harmless, ordinary, welcoming. But behind that glass, he had seen the fracture. And now, piece by piece, he would uncover the rest. The next morning the drizzle returned, just enough to blur the windshield as Jackson parked across the street from the bakery. He didn't step inside immediately. He sat in the driver's seat, hands resting on the wheel, eyes locked on the glowing sign that flickered against the gray dawn. To anyone else, this branch looked ordinary, but after what he had seen, every detail felt louder. Every corner carried weight. He watched through the fogged glass as the crew prepared for opening. The same young woman moved with quiet efficiency, setting trays, arranging mugs, guiding a nervous trainee through the motions. Jackson's gaze shifted to the counter. 2 men stood near the register, neither carrying trays nor helping customers. One leaned against the POS terminal, tapping the screen with lazy familiarity. The other crossed his arms, watching like a guard at his post. Jackson's chest tightened. Yesterday, she had admitted she didn't have access to payments. Supplemental staff, she called it. Invisible. And here was the reason why. He watched carefully. Customers ordered, coffee poured, buns served, but the tips? They all flowed through the same terminal, the same pair of hands. The math was starting to speak for itself. When the woman passed by his corner table, he lowered his voice, casual but deliberate. Why don't you take the payments yourself? She didn't stop moving, didn't even glance up. She leaned slightly as she cleared a plate. I don't have clearance. Only certain roles do. If you're not assigned, you don't see the tips either. She tilted her head ever so slightly toward the register. He decides the roles, Brad. Jackson followed her gaze. The manager stood behind the counter, crisp shirt, sleeves rolled perfectly. He laughed easily with a regular posture relaxed, the picture of control. Anyone looking at him would see competence. but beneath the polished smile was a system twisted into his own design. Minutes later, the woman returned with something pressed tightly in her hand. A small notebook, edges soft from use, ink smudged from flour-stained fingers. She placed it gently on Jackson's table, her voice barely above a whisper. I needed to know I wasn't crazy, so I wrote it down. Jackson opened it slowly, treating it with reverence. Every page told a story, dates, table numbers, bill totals, amounts circled in red. Discrepancies appeared again and again, the same pattern repeating. He saw her handwriting tremble in the margins, small notes of frustration, timestamps, names. At the bottom of one page, a number stood out. $627, lost in just 4 weeks. His jaw tightened. She looked down at her hands, not the book. I've lost more than 600 this month. But what hurts more is that no one ever asked who divides it, or how. It's like we don't exist. Jackson closed the notebook carefully, sliding it back toward her. He didn't argue. He didn't promise. He only let the silence stretch, heavy and deliberate, as though the air itself acknowledged her words. In his chest, something shifted. A restaurant could survive slim margins. It could even survive bad reviews. But it could never survive the moment its best people believed the system no longer saw them. He lifted his coffee cup, found it had gone cold again. The bitterness this time wasn't from the drink. It came from the truth sitting in front of him. He let the cup rest back on the table and kept his eyes steady on the counter. The pattern was too clear now to ignore. At that moment, one of the men at the register tapped a few screens with suspicious ease. Jackson leaned slightly to see. Not just payments, user roles, access levels, settings hidden behind menus that no ordinary part-time server should even know. The screen flickered briefly before closing, but it was enough. Jackson had seen it. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. He slipped it out, shielded by his palm, and snapped a photo of the open notebook, page by page, capturing every red circle, every timestamp. Then he tucked the phone away and pulled a small sticky note from his wallet. On it, he scribbled in block letters, "Keep documenting. Don't share this with anyone. Wait for me to return." He slid the note into the front cover and pushed the cup forward to conceal the gesture. By the time she returned, the notebook was back in her apron, hidden again like a secret too fragile to expose. Jackson leaned back in the booth, his face calm, but his mind was already racing. The investigation had begun, quietly, invisibly. And if Brad Coleman thought a clever configuration could hide the truth, he was about to learn how wrong he was. When Jackson finally left the bakery, the rain had stopped. The air felt lighter, but inside him, a storm had just begun. By the time Jackson reached his truck, the morning had fully broken. The clouds thinned, but the weight inside him grew heavier. He closed the door, sat for a moment, and pulled out his phone. He didn't need to deliberate. He already knew who to call. "Mara," he said when the line connected. His tone was steady, almost too calm. "We have a problem." Mara Lynn, head of internal investigations, didn't ask what kind. She'd been with Sunrise 7 years, long enough to read the unspoken. Jackson continued anyway. "The POS system is being manipulated. Roles are being reassigned, tips rerouted. I need you to go in quiet, line by line, every account, every override. Don't alert the branch." "Understood," she replied. That was all. The call ended. Within an hour, the POS terminal at the bakery had been switched to silent audit mode. From the staff's perspective, nothing changed. Orders still rang up, cards still swiped, receipts still printed, but every keystroke, every role change, every hidden permission was now captured in the background. The first report landed the next morning. Finding number 1, a hidden access tier labeled Preferred Internal. It didn't show up on the normal staff screen, but it had been applied to 3 accounts: Brad Coleman Manager, Tyler C., Part-Time Server, and a phantom account labeled Kitchen Support 03. Finding number 2. Over the last 30 days, digital tips totaled nearly $4,800. Of that, 67% had been routed through Tyler C., yet his service volume accounted for less than 15% of tables. Finding number 3. Payroll listed a part-time kitchen worker named Marcus Hill, clocked in for 21 of the last 25 mornings. But Marcus Hill did not exist. No tax record, no HR file, a social security number already flagged in another branch 2 years ago. Jackson remembered that case. Insufficient proof back then. Same manager involved. Brad Coleman. The final detail came from finance. A shell company, Douglas Henderson LLC, was receiving weekly service fees. On paper, it looked like logistics payments. In reality, the amounts matched the missing tips to the dollar. The registration traced back to an old email used by Brad himself. Jackson scrolled through the findings in silence. His jaw didn't clench. His hands didn't tremble. He simply read, absorbing each line like pieces of a puzzle he already suspected. When the last screen closed, he leaned back in the seat, eyes fixed on the bakery sign glowing across the lot. Inside, customers sipped coffee, unaware. Staff moved in silence, the same routines playing out. But beneath the surface, everything had shifted. Jackson now carried proof, not just suspicion. And proof changed everything. He opened the glove compartment, pulled out a notebook of his own, and wrote 3 words across a blank page. Audit, evidence, confrontation. He underlined each one, then shut the book firmly. That evening, Mara called back. "It's deeper than we thought," she said flatly. "We've mapped the overrides. It's deliberate. Brad has been cycling accounts to avoid detection. The notebook you found? It matches our data point for point." Jackson's voice was low, certain. "Good. Keep collecting. I'll handle the rest." He ended the call, but he didn't start the truck. He sat there, watching the glow of the bakery windows as night settled in. Somewhere inside, the young woman still worked, hands dusted in flour, apron worn thin. She had carried the truth in silence, thinking no one would ever ask. Now, finally, someone had. Jackson whispered to himself, not as a vow, but as a verdict. This ends here. The storm he had been holding back was ready to break. 2 days later, Jackson walked back into the bakery. No disguise this time. No cap pulled low. No attempt to blend into the background. He stepped through the door as himself, posture straight, expression calm, but with the kind of presence that made the air shift. Customers noticed first the quiet pause in conversation, the subtle glance toward the man who didn't look like he belonged to a small-town diner at all. Brad Coleman stood at the counter, sleeves rolled neatly, a smile fixed in place as he chatted with a couple of regulars. His laugh was easy, too easy, but the moment his eyes landed on Jackson, something flickered recognition without certainty, like a shadow he couldn't name. Jackson moved to the same booth he had sat in before, the corner seat with sightlines across the floor. He didn't need to order. The young woman noticed him immediately. Her pace stuttered, just slightly, before she set down the tray she was carrying. She approached with caution, notebook still tucked in her apron. Jackson spoke softly, but this time his words carried weight. "Keep it with you," he said. "You won't need to fight alone today." Her eyes widened, confusion mixing with the faintest spark of hope. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded once and slipped the notebook deeper into her pocket. The room shifted again when Jackson stood. He crossed the floor, straight toward the counter. Brad straightened, his polished smile turning into something tighter, more cautious. "Morning," Brad said, voice rehearsed. "Can I help you?" Jackson placed a folder on the counter. He opened it slowly, revealing page after page of printed records, transaction logs, payroll anomalies, shell company transfers. Every detail Mara's team had uncovered. He laid the evidence down like bricks on a foundation, one sheet at a time, his voice low but unmistakable. "You've been rerouting tips through hidden roles. You've created ghost employees. And you've been funneling money to a company that traces back to you." Jackson's tone never rose. He didn't need volume. Every word was precise, cutting, leaving no room for denial. Brad's face tightened. "I don't know what you think you—" Jackson cut him off, calm and deliberate. "I don't think. I know. And so does the audit team. Every keystroke you thought was hidden, it's recorded. Every dollar you redirected, tracked." He leaned in slightly, not aggressive, but absolute. "This is over." For the first time, the room fell completely silent. Customers stopped mid-sentence. Staff froze in place, their eyes darting between Brad and Jackson. The young woman stood near the prep counter, her hands clenched around her apron. She didn't move, but her breath caught audibly. Brad opened his mouth, then closed it again. His polished demeanor slipped, the practiced ease unraveling into a thin veneer of panic. He reached for the folder as if to push it aside, but Jackson's hand came down firmly, holding it in place. "You've been taking from the very people who keep this place alive," Jackson said, voice steady. "And you thought no one would notice. But someone did. She did." He turned slightly, gesturing toward the woman without saying her name, letting the room follow his gaze. And now so do I. A murmur rippled across the diner. The staff exchanged glances, realization dawning that the silence they had endured might finally be ending. Jackson didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than anything else. He gathered the folder, closed it neatly, and straightened. "Effective immediately," he said. "You're suspended pending termination review. Security will escort you out." The words landed heavy, final. Brad's mouth opened once more, but nothing came out. He looked around the room, searching for support, but none came. The same customers who once laughed at his jokes now looked away. The same staff who obeyed his orders now stood motionless, unwilling to step forward. Jackson turned slightly, scanning the room. His voice carried evenly, calm but resolute. This business was built on trust, and trust doesn't vanish in one day. It dies in silence, piece by piece. That ends now. The young woman's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with the relief of finally being seen. Jackson met her gaze, nodded once, and then turned back toward the counter. The storm had broken, and for the first time in months, the air inside the bakery felt lighter. Brad didn't fight, not really. His face flushed, his posture stiffened, but the certainty in Jackson's voice had drained the room of any ground he could stand on. When two regional compliance officers stepped through the door minutes later, summoned quietly before Jackson even arrived, Brad tried a last smile, but it faltered halfway. He followed them out, his polished shoes echoing against the tile. The sound felt more like an ending than an exit. For the first time all morning, the bakery was silent. Staff who had frozen in place slowly returned to motion, uncertain, cautious, as though testing the air for cracks. Jackson stayed at the counter, folder still in hand, but his gaze had shifted, not toward Brad anymore, but toward the people who remained. The young woman stepped forward, her apron still dusted white, notebook clutched tightly. She hesitated, then set it on the counter, sliding it toward him as if surrendering the last piece of herself she had hidden. Jackson didn't take it immediately. He rested his hand on the cover, gently, like the pages deserved more respect than paper usually held. "You carried the truth when no one else would," he said, voice even but carrying. "That matters, more than you think." Her breath hitched, but she nodded, eyes lowered. Around them, the other staff exchanged glances. One spoke up, a trainee, voice unsteady. "We all knew something was wrong. Just, no one thought it could change." Jackson turned toward him, calm. "It changes now. And it changes because someone decided to write it down, even when she thought no one would ever look." The weight in the room shifted, slowly at first. Heads lifted, shoulders straightened. The silence that had once been submission began to feel like release. Jackson opened the notebook at random, showing the room a page, red circles, timestamps, the kind of proof that couldn't be brushed aside. "This is what integrity looks like. Not spreadsheets, not reports. This." He closed the book softly and placed it back into her hands. "Keep it, it's yours, and from today you're no longer invisible." Oh, a murmur swept through the bakery, quiet but alive. The young woman's fingers tightened around the notebook, as if it were the first time anyone had ever told her those words. Jackson didn't linger on sentiment. He turned back to the counter, pulled out his phone, and dialed. The call connected quickly. "This is Reeves," he said. "Replace every terminal in this branch. Install full transparency protocols, effective immediately, and send in HR. These employees will be compensated for what was stolen." He ended the call, slipped the phone back into his jacket, and looked around the room once more. "This place will run differently now, and you'll all have a say in how." The staff didn't cheer. There was no applause. But the shift was visible in the way they stood, the way their eyes met his, the quiet dignity of being seen again. The young woman finally allowed herself a faint smile, the corners of her lips trembling as though unused to the motion. She didn't thank him, not yet. Gratitude wasn't the point. Recognition was. Jackson adjusted his jacket, picked up the folder, and stepped back from the counter. "This bakery isn't just ovens and receipts," he said, voice steady, meant for every ear in the room. "It's people. And people should never have to pay to keep the lights on for someone else's profit." Yeah. As he turned toward the door, the neon open sign flickered once, its hum soft against the sudden quiet. Jackson paused, glanced back at the woman still holding her notebook, and gave a single nod. Then he stepped outside into the cool morning air. The drizzle had stopped. The storm, at least inside, had broken. The following week, Jackson returned to the branch. Not as a stranger, not even as a hidden observer this time, he walked in openly, the kind of presence that could not be mistaken. The morning rush had just begun. The smell of fresh coffee cut through the air, and trays of buns moved quickly from oven to counter. But something was different. The silence he had felt before was gone. The young woman stood at the center of it, her sleeves rolled up, apron new but already dusted with flour, her voice calm as she guided a trainee through the steps of shaping dough. She corrected gently, not with authority but with care, showing how to fold the edges, how to keep the buns even. Around her, the staff moved with a rhythm that looked lighter, more intentional. Jackson took a seat near the back, this time not to hide but to watch. A customer paid at the register. He noticed the slip print instantly. Clear, transparent, tip amount displayed and split across every logged employee. No hidden roles, no shadow accounts. The system had been reset exactly as he ordered. He called the woman over when she had a moment. She approached steadily, notebook still tucked in her apron out of habit, though it was no longer needed. He gestured toward the staff around them. "How does it feel?" She hesitated, then answered honestly. "Different. Not perfect, but fair. At least now, when we work, we know it counts." Her words carried more weight than any report. Fair. That was the shift he had needed to see. Across the room, the trainee from before looked up and caught Jackson's eye. He gave a quick nod, small but certain. Jackson returned it, a silent agreement that the future of this branch no longer depended on fear. The door opened, and a couple stepped in, shaking off the morning chill. They ordered, laughed, lingered over the counter. Normal, ordinary. The kind of ordinary Jackson had built his company on, the kind that only exists when the people behind the counter are respected enough to stand tall. Jackson leaned forward, voice lowered so only the woman could hear. "You carried this place when no one noticed. Don't underestimate what that means." She looked down briefly, then back at him, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I just didn't want to feel crazy. I wanted proof." "And you got it," Jackson said. "And because of you, so did I." He reached into his jacket and slid a single envelope across the counter. She frowned slightly, confused, until he added, "HR will explain. Consider it both repayment and recognition. What you lost isn't just dollars, it's trust, and we can't run a company without it." Her hands trembled as she accepted it, but she didn't open it. Not yet. She didn't need to. Jackson rose from his seat, straightened his jacket, and glanced once more at the staff. The energy in the room was different now, not frantic, not fearful, just steady, sustainable. Before leaving, he paused at the door. His voice carried across the bakery, calm but firm. Leadership isn't built on numbers. It's built on moments like these, moments when the right person chooses to act, even when no one is watching. The staff grew still, listening, not because he demanded it, but because the words rang true. Then the room returned to motion, as it always should. Work continued, laughter rose, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. Jackson stepped outside, the cool air crisp against his face. He didn't look back immediately. He let the sound of the bakery spill into the street behind him, proof enough that something broken had been repaired. Only when he reached his truck did he glance once more through the window. The woman was smiling faintly as she helped the trainee dust flour from her apron. For the first time, it looked like a place that could last. Jackson started the engine, steady and sure. The storm that had begun with a notebook and a whisper was over. What remained was something stronger, trust, rebuilt, one bun, one shift, one voice at a time. A few days later, Jackson sat in the boardroom, miles away from that quiet street corner bakery. The long mahogany table gleamed under sharp light, walls lined with framed awards and financial charts. Executives filled the seats, laptops open, eyes expectant. They wanted numbers, quarterly updates, projections. But Jackson began with something else. He set a small, battered notebook in the center of the table. Flour still clung faintly to its cover. "This," he said evenly, "is worth more than any spreadsheet you've pulled this month." The room grew still. Some exchanged confused glances. Others leaned forward, curious. Jackson opened to a random page. Dates, figures, tip amount circled in red. The handwriting wavered, rushed, but undeniable. This is what happens when oversight fails, when systems are trusted more than people. One of our employees carried this book because she thought no one else would care. And for too long, she was right. His tone sharpened. If our company can't protect the hands that bake the bread, then the empire it sits on is already rotten. No one spoke. The usual clatter of keys and whispered side notes vanished. Every eye stayed fixed on the notebook. Jackson continued. Brad Coleman exploited the cracks. He created ghost employees, rerouted tips, and drained money through a shell company. He believed no one would question him, and he was almost right until a young woman chose to document every cent. That's why we found out. Not because of audit software, not because of management reports, because of her. He closed the notebook gently, letting the silence stretch. From now on, every branch gets a transparent POS upgrade. Every manager will undergo independent audits twice a year. And most importantly, any employee, from dishwasher to baker, will have direct access to a reporting line outside their store, anonymous if they choose. We will not rely on silence again. An executive near the end of the table shifted, hesitant. That will cost, Jackson cut in, voice firm but calm. It will cost less than losing the trust of the people who wake up at 4 a.m. to keep our doors open. Integrity is not an expense. It's the foundation. Without it, everything else collapses. The room fell quiet again, but this time the silence carried agreement. Heads nodded slowly. Pages turned. Action points formed. Jackson leaned back, gaze steady. We measure success in revenue. But after what I saw, I'll tell you how I measure it now. In whether our people feel seen. In whether someone like her ever has to write in a notebook again. He stood, tucked the notebook under his arm, and walked out. The board remained silent, not out of defiance, but out of respect. They had seen the truth laid bare, and none of them would forget it. The next morning, Jackson returned one last time to the bakery. The air was crisp, the sky pale blue, and the hum of the neon sign blended with the clatter of early deliveries. He didn't come in with files or evidence this time. He came with nothing but presence. Inside, the staff moved with quiet confidence. The register now displayed every transaction transparently, tips divided automatically across the log team. The tension that once haunted the room had lifted. Laughter rose from behind the counter as two employees joked while arranging pastries. It felt like a place reborn. The young woman noticed him near the door. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked over, no hesitation in her step. The notebook was gone. She didn't need it anymore. She smiled faintly. "It's different now," she said. Jackson nodded. "It should have been different all along." They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, the smell of cinnamon and butter filling the air. Finally, she added, "Thank you. Not just for fixing it, for seeing us." Jackson's expression softened, but his reply stayed steady. "You did the hard part. You chose not to stay silent. All I did was listen." Ugh. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. Around them, the bakery buzzed with a new rhythm, customers chatting, staff moving freely, the weight of fear gone. Jackson adjusted his jacket, preparing to leave. Before stepping out, he turned back once more, his voice calm but clear, meant for everyone in the room. Fairness isn't a gift a company hands out. It's a promise we keep, every day. If we forget that, we lose everything worth building. No applause followed. No dramatic cheer. Just a quiet recognition, the kind that lingers deeper than noise. The staff returned to work, shoulders straighter, voices lighter, and the smell of fresh bread stronger than ever. Jackson stepped into the sunlight, the door closing softly behind him. The storm had passed, leaving not chaos but clarity. For him, leadership was never about grand speeches or headlines. It was about mornings like this, walking out of a bakery where dignity had finally been restored, and knowing that justice had been served in silence. And as he crossed the street, the neon sign flickered once more. This time, it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a beginning.